without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. And we're going to start, obviously, at the beginning, because that's the best place to start when you're talking about history. Okay, so we're going to talk about exploration, colonialism, and the American Revolution. Now, we probably, again, won't get to kind of all of that today, but I will do my best to kind of just talk generally about some of this. All right, so let's start with exploration. So if we roll back time and we look on this map here, hopefully you can see it kind of clearly. You know, we see 1400s, 1500s, so we're talking 500 years ago, right? Give or take. So the world looked a lot different 500 years ago in terms of where people were, what people knew about, right? So exploration was a booming industry at the time, or it was something that countries were consumed with doing, and because there was so much unknown that people didn't know. So if you kind of look on this map, the countries that are highlighted are Portugal, Spain, France, and England. So we've got England up here in yellow. Hopefully you can kind of see. France, purple. Spain in red, and then Portugal is this little tiny country in green. And so all of these different routes are just all the different explorers and kind of where they went and what they found. Okay? So what is the difference? What is to explore versus when we talk about colonizing? That's a difference I want to make sure we understand. Right? So when it first started out, people were simply exploring to explore, right? To explore something means to go out and discover new things. And that's essentially all they were doing. They didn't have always a clear purpose or a clear reason. They were just going out and seeing what they could find. That's kind of how it started. And ultimately it started out as kind of a competition. Or I guess I shouldn't say it started that way, but it definitely got to be that. Because England, France, Spain, and Portugal were kind of the main hubs of civilization. In other words, that's where most of the people were, right? Okay. All right, so distracting myself with making sure I've got things kind of up and running. So again, these countries were just exploring to see what they could find. And part of the reason that they wanted to explore, because if you notice, look how small their countries are, right? England, France, Spain, and Portugal are relatively tiny countries. And so they had had people living there for a long time. And we're getting crowded. These places were essentially, there was nothing left to explore in their countries, and so they were looking to see where else they could expand their power or see what they could find. And ultimately, they were looking for goods, right? That's kind of what drove this expansion. They were looking to see what was out there, but then in the end, they were looking to see what kind of things they could find that would benefit, right? And so this all kind of took off after the Silk Road to Asia, which was Marco Polo in the 12th. So even 200 or 300 years before this, right? And these people were coming back from Asia with silk, porcelain, ivory, bronze, cinnamon, ginger, all of these different spices, all of these different things that they'd never seen before, right? So imagine if you're a European in 1500 or 1400 and you see some of these things that don't sound fantastic. But They're totally new, things that you didn't even know existed. And so it really piqued these people's interests. They really wanted to go out and see what they could find. Okay, so again, goods were the big driver in exploration. They wanted to go out and find these things, and they ultimately wanted to find a way to China that involved sea passage to China, not overland. Because if you look on the map here, and hopefully you can see my cursor, right? Here's all of these countries. Here's Europe. Here's Asia. So China is over here. So the Silk Road was kind of the inland route to Asia at the time, went all the way through Europe, all the way across Asia, all the way to China. People forever. So they thought there must be a faster way to get to China. And so let's try setting out to sea and seeing if we can get to China faster by sea. So that's essentially what they did in the beginning, right? And they kind of found, wow, Africa is a lot bigger than maybe we thought. And so it took, and eventually they discovered a way around Africa to Asia, but it took them, again, an awfully long time. So people were just kind of unsure what was out there. All right, breaking my rule of not moving fast. So let me continue on. So here, again, is a map of kind of the same thing we just looked at, a little more in depth and a little more on it. But essentially, it's the same thing. Okay? Same 4 countries, and those weren't the only 4 countries that were exploring, but they were the big, powerful countries at the time. Most of these. Okay? So again, we've got Spain, which is the brown color here. France is the kind of pink, light purple color. Portugal is the dark purple. England is. So notice at the time of this is 1486 to 1611. England hadn't really claimed any land. They were exploring, but the key difference here is that after the exploration phase, so after all these countries went out and saw what they could see, the next stage was colonialization, which was set up territories, have people from France or from Spain or from England go and live in these places and colonize. Essentially, have people from their country go and live in these places. Right? So that was kind of the next step. So first we had exploration, then we had all these people that were actually colonizing these areas. So again, we have Spain, which discovered lots of the Caribbean, Mexico, Latin America, South America, and so there's a reason why people in Mexico and most parts of Latin America speak Spanish. And that's because they were colonized by Spaniards 500 years ago, right? At some point in time, they spoke some indigenous language, and it wasn't Spanish, right? They learned Spanish from Spaniards that came over, right? Same thing with France. France set up territories in kind of eastern Canada and parts of what are the northeastern US, but largely eastern Canada, right? And today, lots of people in eastern Canada speak French. You've probably heard of French Canadian, maybe you haven't. But they speak French because French people settled there 500, 600 years ago. Okay, so again, all of these things have lasting impact. Same with Portugal. Brazil speaks Portuguese today, and that's because part of Brazil was, you guessed it, colonized by Portuguese, or by the Portuguese. Okay, so again, and that's why we speak English. We're colonized by English-speaking people 500 years ago. Okay, so this map is showing kind of the change from exploration to now we're talking about colonialization. So let me hone in even more specifically and talk about talk more specifically about just the colonization of the Americas. Okay. So if we just focus on kind of North America, because eventually the goal here is to get to talking about U.S. history. We're not talking about the whole world yet. At some point, we will do a quick run through of ancient civilizations and world history, but that will come later, and that will be really short. So, focusing it down now from world exploration and world colonialization to just North America. So, that hopefully looks familiar. So we have this big chunk of yellow, which is Spanish, basically Spanish-controlled land. We have the blue section, which is French-controlled land. We have the red, which is controlled by Britain. We have the big green section, which is unexplored. This is the 1600s. Okay? So we've got Britain, France, and Spain, and they're all kind of vying for power and influence when it comes to North America. And again, we won't focus a ton on it, but obviously they got there, they felt this land was empty, right? They didn't know what was out there, but then they found out the Native Americans were there, and that led to all kinds of complications, which we now know looking back, right? Some of them listed here, right? The Native Americans were susceptible to European diseases because these were new diseases that had never been around, right? So they were totally, their immune systems just weren't up to it, right? So we had lots of Native Americans dying from disease. Their view of land ownership was different than Europeans. They didn't necessarily own lands, whereas Europeans, you know, this is my 5 acres or 20 acres, whatever, and it's mine, not anybody else. That wasn't necessarily how Native Americans viewed land. And then relationships worsened as the colonial populations grew. So at first, it was kind of this back and forth. They were feeling each other out. You know, there were some friendly Indian tribes, there were some less friendly, right? But in general, their relationship was agreeable, right? And they traded back and forth. They were mutually beneficial to each other. But eventually, as we know, right, populations boomed, and they kept moving Native Americans basically further and further into the outer reaches of unexplored land, and then eventually they got kind of pushed out altogether. We'll come back to that at a different point. I'm gonna keep going. All right. So when we're talking about North America, trade was a big thing, right? That was when ultimately Christopher Columbus discovered America. It was an accident, right? He thought he had discovered route to China and in India. So, but when he realized that he hadn't, first, you know, it was maybe a disappointment even. But then he realized there were all of these other things that were new and different that were things that people in Europe could want. And so you started to see a lot of the things that grew in North America that were unique. So you get this big exchange of food and goods between Europe and North America. I'm not going to necessarily go through all of these things, kind of read them for yourself. We had some of the big things were tobacco, corn, lots of those types of food and plants like that. But essentially, tobacco was one of the big, really what drove the North America. All right. Then later on, as things kind of get more solidified, and you start to get more and more people going to North America to live and as part of this trade, you start to develop this trade triangle. And this was essentially, you know, ships would go from North America to Europe to Africa, back to North America to Europe, and it would just keep going around like this, and they take goods from one place to the other, and so on and so forth. So you had stuff like sugar, tobacco, cotton. Those were all things that were big in North America that were then exported to Europe. That stuff was turned into textiles, rum was made, you know, manufactured goods, like they basically took that and made the final product, and that stuff was taken to Africa, and then from Africa, they took slaves and took them to North America to work these fields. Because part of the thing with sugar, tobacco, cotton is you got to grow a lot of it. And to grow a lot of it, you need huge amounts of land, and you need lots of people to work your farms. So that's how we ended up, bringing all of these African slaves over to North America, get put on these plantations. All right, so hopefully I'm not kind of rolling through this too fast, but again, for the sake of time, I want to make sure I don't spend too much time talking about any kind of one thing. So now let's just look at kind of the original 13 colonies, or the what would eventually become the United States. So if we go back, and just to make sure we know what we're talking about here, this little strip of red right here, where it says Britain, that is the original 13 colonies. So that's essentially what would become the first 13 states of the United States of America. Okay. So back to this. What were some of the reasons that these colonists wanted to come to the United States? Right? There were lots of different, but essentially they were people looking for new and different opportunities. Weren't necessarily, very successful, very wealthy people, because if you were successful and wealthy in England, why would you feel the need to leave? Right? These were people that were, that had some kind of issue going on that they wanted to get away from, or they wanted to start new, or they wanted some amount of different opportunity. Some of that was economic, right? So a lot of people came because they were guaranteed land. If you came to America, you were given land to do with it as you wanted, right? So you were essentially given a place to live, and you had lots of new enterprises or jobs that were available that maybe weren't in England. People came to work. Right? There are a lot of people that, just like today, there are lots of jobs in a certain place, people go. Whereas if there aren't a lot of jobs, people tend to leave those. So England at the time, crowded, there wasn't a demand for work as much, but then we have this brand new discovered territory that's totally empty, and empty so we think, right? But in terms of English people, there weren't, you could go over there, get land, get jobs, and be successful. So people thought that was a great, great proposition. Again, you were given 50 acres per person if you were a British citizen that wanted to go to America. But you also had lots of people that couldn't pay their way to America but still wanted to go. And so those people were called indentured servants. Maybe you've heard that term before. That is essentially someone would pay for you to travel to America. They'd pay for your passage across the Atlantic Ocean. When you got there, you owed that person X amount of years of work. So some people would work 5, 10 years before they were actually given their freedom. So they were essentially, brought over, paid, their way was paid, and they were housed by whoever the person was that needed them to work, and they worked there until they paid off their chunk of time, and then they were free to go and do their thing. Then, lastly, you had lots of people seeking political and religious freedom. So the Church of England wasn't necessarily, forgiving isn't quite the right word, but they didn't allow people to practice whatever religion they wanted, right? The Church of England was the religion of England. And if you practiced something different, you were often persecuted or ostracized, or so these people didn't feel welcome. So they were quick to. So you've maybe heard some of these things, like the Puritans or the Pilgrims. So you had essentially Protestants and Catholics fighting each other in Europe, and then you had all these kind of extreme religious groups that wanted to get away from this. So you had Puritans, and those were the people that were part of the Church of England who thought that the church wasn't doing enough, or that wasn't purifying themselves from the influences of Catholicism. They were strongly anti-Catholic. They wanted to practice what they thought was a higher level of religious purity. So they said, "What? This is a good opportunity. I'm just going to leave, and we're going to go to America, and we're going to start our own religion in our own spot and do what we want." Right? So you had the Puritans, you had the Separatists, who came over to Plymouth Rock in 1620, and those were, again, a radical religious group separated from the Church of England to practice their own style of Puritan or Protestantism. So they were still Protestant. They were a little bit different, and they wanted to do things their own way, so they left to come to America. And then the Pilgrims came even later than that, and they came to Salem, Massachusetts in 1649. So you had all these different groups of people wanting and seeking religious freedom to come and practice in America, because there was no one there to tell them what to do. So again, lots of different reasons that you had people coming to this. This feels like a good place to stop. I'll run through this real quickly, and then I will probably do the same thing tomorrow. So let's look at the original 13 colonies, and then maybe we'll have time to do a practice question. So most of these, hopefully all of these, are familiar to you because they're all states in the United States. They were also the original 13 colonies. So we had Massachusetts, we had Connecticut, New York, Delaware, and New Jersey, Rhode Island and New Hampshire, Maryland, Virginia, Pennsylvania, North and South Carolina, and Georgia. So I'm not going to go through and talk about them all individually. Maybe we can start there tomorrow and look at them a little bit more in depth. Those are the original 13. So with that, let me stop this and share some practice questions. And I will say, on kind of a side note, it's good to start seeing more and more people in the classes. So that's good. That's a good thing. Spread the word, and hopefully these classes are helping you somewhat. And if we're not helping you enough, please feel free to reach out and tell us, what we can do to make them better. But again, I'm glad to see more and more people. That's awesome. So let me pull up some practice questions, and let's go through some. Go down here. All right, so it says questions 1 and 2 refer to this map. So let's look first at, I guess I'll zoom in and let's just do number 1. So if it's a little bit hard to see, hopefully you can kind of make it out. But it's good to go over some maps every once in a while, because maps are definitely going to be something you're going to need to be familiar with on the test. So definitely get some questions. So this map is titled European Colonial Settlements, 1650. So we've got all the different European settlements there on the map. And number 1 just says, choose the correct phrase that would fill in the blank. Based on the map, blank had the southernmost colony in 1650. Okay, so again, you can read the map and you know kind of what you're looking at here. This area here, we call the key. And the key tells us kind of what we're looking at. And so in this situation, the area where we have the horizontal lines would be Dutch settlement. The gray would be English settlements. Black would be French settlements. So we've got some French up here and around here. Spanish would be these diagonal lines, which would be there. And the Swedish would be straight vertical there. So it's kind of hard to read, but hopefully that kind of makes sense. Okay? And the question just asks, based on the map, which of these 4, Dutch, English, Spanish, Swedish, the southernmost colony? So a couple things here. First, you need to make sure you can read the key and know what you're looking at. Secondly, you need to make sure you know what southernmost is. So be careful with maps to assume that up is north. In this situation, it is, but be careful. Always look to see if you can find a compass. Here is our compass. North is this way, obviously. South is this way. So the southernmost colony is what? Augustine. And St. Augustine is diagonal lines, so St. Augustine is Spanish. So hopefully that was pretty straightforward. Let's check in on number 2. So for those of you that haven't attended class before with me, if you want to answer in the chat, either publicly or privately, just to kind of move along with us, feel free to do that. If not, that's totally okay. So let me see if I can get most of this map on here. Pretty as close as I can get, without zooming way out. So number 2 is which of the following conclusions is supported by the map? Again, not as straightforward as number 1, and number 2 requires a little more. I'm really struggling today. Requires a little more analysis, right? There's more to it. So let's read it first, and we'll end with this one, and then we'll come back and we'll do the rest of these questions. So number 2 says, which of the following conclusions is supported by the map? A, by 1650, Spain had conquered most of North America. B, the English established several colonies in the New World. C, the Dutch established their colonies in the western part of North America. Or D, French colonies extended along the east coast between Boston and Maine. All right, so let's see if we can't find some that clearly stand out as being wrong. I would say A. By 1650, Spain had conquered most of North America. The only place we see Spain is right here. I wouldn't say that's most of North America. So I'd throw out A right away. And C, I'd probably throw out right away. The Dutch established their colonies in the western part of North America. Okay, let's find the Dutch. The Dutch are these horizontal lines. The horizontal lines are here. Okay, so that's obviously not the western part of North America. First of all, the western part of North America isn't even on this map. This is only the east coast. So if you know your geography somewhat, then you know that we're not looking at nothing on this map was in the western part of North America. So definitely not true. Or if it is true, it's not something we can prove based on the information they give us. Okay, so don't make assumptions that you can't prove off what they do. So if we've thrown out A and C, then the only thing left is B and D. So either tell me in the chat or talk amongst yourselves. What do you think is, or talk to yourself, literally, and what do you think the right answer is here? B, the English established several colonies in the New World, or D, French colonies extended along the east coast between Boston and Jamestown. Several colonies in the New World. Okay, so English is gray, so I see some gray here, some gray up here. Okay, so that might be true. Okay, let's look at D. French colonies extended along the east coast, Boston and Jamestown. So first, let's find Boston. Then let's find Jamestown. Do French colonies extend along the east coast all the way between those two? No. So the right answer here, even if it's not a great answer, the best one they give us is B. The English established several colonies in the New World. All right, so let's stop there. Hopefully tomorrow I'll be a little less frazzled and maybe less confusing. And we'll talk more about colonialization in kind of the early Americas, and then we'll do some of these other practice questions. Okay, and again, I really will try to go through this as quickly as I can, but while still taking time to make sure we understand.